I got the invite for the recording, Ina.
Finally.
Okay. So maybe if you don't mind, Ina, while we wait, I'm going to put a link in the chat box that in case anyone would like any additional information, let me get the right link. You can fill out this link and you will get put into our system to be invited to future events. So I have current graduate students who help with different events. They host different webinars like funding, applying to graduate school. They do one-on-one sessions. So you'll also receive information from the departments that you're interested in. So it's a good way to just stay in touch with us if you'd like.
Good. So now we can, I think, jump to the Facebook page and start.
Okay. Ina, I just got the Facebook Live notification. So would you like us to start, or are you still setting something up?
Okay, I think we can start now.
Okay.
Just wanted to say thank you to our audience, those who are watching us on Facebook and those who joined us via Zoom. Thank you very much for joining us today. So as you know, I'm Ina Rabulian, Education USA Advisor at the American Consul's Office in Armenia. And today we are speaking about graduate admission to US universities. We have honored to present you our today's guest speakers from the University at Albany, Professor Rey Koslowski, Professor in the Rockefeller College of the Public Affairs and Policy at the University at Albany and Director of the Masters International Affairs. Dr. Koslowski's primary teaching and research interests are in the field of international relations, dealing with international organizations, European integration, migration, information technology, and homeland security. Hi, Professor. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you.
And I also have honor to present you Ms. Soha Acosta, Director of Graduate Recruitment and Marketing in the Graduate School at the University at Albany. She is in charge of all recruitment and marketing locally, nationally, and internationally, and handles all the admissions processing for the international students. So great people today are with us, and they have great resource to share with you. So please stay with us. And at the end of the presentation, we'll also open the floor for questions. So those who join us via Zoom, please type your questions in the chat box. Those who are watching us on Facebook, please leave your questions in the comment box and I will read them to our guest speakers. So once again, thank you for joining us and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ina. So thank you everyone for joining us. Like Ina mentioned, you have a little bit of insider knowledge from this presentation because we have Dr. Koslowski with us. So someone who sits on a graduate admissions committee to give his insight, to give his opinions, to give tips on what to do and what not to do, what he has seen that has worked, what may not work. So we'll go through the whole graduate application process in today's agenda. We'll go through every part of the application. We'll speak upon them, maybe some tips, do's and don'ts. And then, like I said, Dr. Koslowski will be able to provide his insight on this as well as someone who sits on a graduate admissions committee reading graduate applications. At any point, please feel free to ask questions and we will leave time at the end as well for some questions and answers. So the first part, I like to get this out of the way because there's standardized tests and who wants to take standardized tests. So let's just get this one out of the way. Is the standardized test as part of the graduate application? I will say the most common one is usually the GRE exam. So you may be applying to some schools that require this. You may be applying to some schools that don't require this. Since COVID and a little bit prior to COVID, there has been a pretty big push to moving away from requiring the GRE exam. That being said, some programs will still require it. So you just want to make sure that you're reading all the instructions and all the application requirements for whichever program you're applying to. It's usually done on the computer. It's similar to the SAT if for undergraduate students or the ACT, but at the graduate level. And I'll get into sort of what it's testing in a second in the different topics. It does have a fee associated with it. It's about $220. So just keep that in mind if you are applying to some programs who do require the GRE. The other thing to keep in mind is that even if the program doesn't require the GRE, if you're applying for funding, maybe some of the funding opportunities you're applying to do require the GRE. And another part to keep in mind for standardized tests, not only a GRE, but also keep in mind that you may be required to take one of the English exams, so either the TOEFL, the IELTS, or the Duolingo. And what is accepted will vary from institution to institution, program to program. So at the University at Albany, we accept all three for most programs. However, there are some programs that do not accept the Duolingo. So they only look for the TOEFL or IELTS. And the scores can vary as well. So our minimum score for most programs is a 79 on the TOEFL, 6.5 on the IELTS, 110 Duolingo. But there are some programs like within Rockefeller and our School of Public Health that require higher English scores. So things to keep an eye out for when you're looking to apply to graduate programs. So what is exactly on the GRE when you're looking at it? And again, I'm focusing on the GRE because that tends to be the most common one required. But standardized tests, if you're applying to a business program, maybe the GMAT. If you're applying to medical school, it could be the MCAT. It varies based on what program you're applying to. It's about 3 hours and 25 minutes. And it's broken down into 3 sections. So analytical writing, where you're going to analyze an issue and an argument. The verbal section, which can be fill in the blanks in regards to vocabulary. It can be antonyms, synonyms. It can be reading and looking at answering different questions based off reading, as well as the quantitative section. This is your math section, which is usually pre-calculus math. So you've probably seen it at some point, maybe either high school, maybe in your undergrad career. So it shouldn't be too unfamiliar, but those are the 3 sections that you will be graded on, that you will be scored on the GRE when you send those out to institutions. Speaking of scoring, so there are the verbal section and the quantitative section are scored on a range from 130 to 170 in 1-point increments. So the minimum score that you may need for your program is going to vary. Some programs don't put out a minimum, like many of the programs at the University at Albany that may require the GRE, because they look at the application holistically. So they're not just looking for a certain GRE score. They're looking at your GRE score. They're looking at your GPA, letters of recommendation. They really are looking at everything. So there's not one set minimum score in order to enter the program. And then the analytical writing section is scored from 0 to 6 on half points. So you could get a 3.5, a 4, 4.5, etc. Just a tip on when I think you should take the GRE is usually I would recommend taking it maybe the summer before you intend to apply, the year before you intend to apply to graduate school. That way you give yourself enough time if maybe you didn't get the score you want. If you need to improve upon anything, you have some time to do that. When you go into the exam, make sure you know the codes for 4 different schools that you would like to send your scores to. You do get to send your scores for free to 4 institutions. After that, it is $27. So if you're applying to 6 institutions, you get 4 for free. The other 2 you do have to pay. So just keep that in mind, that there may be additional costs associated with it. Most programs will probably need official scores. So for them to come directly from ETS, which is the testing agency that gives the GRE. So just make sure you are reading all those requirements and all those details. Will a high score on the TOEFL be considered an advantage, or is it up? That's a good question. So someone asked, will a high score on the TOEFL, about 100 points and up, be considered an advantage? Or is it sort of just like a pass, no pass? Sorry, Ina, I jumped in and read the question. So a high TOEFL score, I don't, and Ray, you can correct me if I'm wrong. A high TOEFL score is a great plus, I think, because in graduate school, you're going to be writing a lot, especially if you're going for funding and you want to be like a TA or an RA. There's a lot of heavy writing, reading, and all of that that's associated with it. But in my opinion, I don't think if your GPA is a 2.5 on the American scale and you have a 100 TOEFL, I don't think it's going to outweigh that academically. Ray, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yes, I think you've captured the issue here. A high TOEFL score, again, is part of that whole package that we look at. So now this is someone who's probably not going to struggle very much, especially in the beginning of the program, with writing, with participation in class, etc. And so it's a real plus. It won't, in a sense, make up for exactly the lower GPA that you had mentioned. All right. I just have let me let you finish up, and I'm going to come back to the TOEFL score in a few.
I am all done. You go ahead.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I keep going then. All right. Well, just to say, first off, again, it varies on the different programs. So I was now I've been the director of our Masters of International Affairs program now for, oh my gosh, it's going on, coming up to a decade. But before then, I was the director of our political science graduate program, and I chaired our admissions committee for applicants into the PhD program. So the PhD program in political science still requires the GRE. However, as Soha had mentioned, some programs dropped the requirement, which was the case with the Masters of International Affairs. So it depends on the package of application materials, and the things that we consider vary. And let me put it to you this way: for a PhD program that requires strong verbal skills, the TOEFL can help, all right, indicate that, yes, this person, and as Soha had pointed out, will probably be in a better position, for example, to serve as a teaching assistant. And for the PhD program, students are applying usually, and they really should, only really consider PhD programs if they are applying for funding, right? Unless they've got funding from another source, from their home country, from a foundation, et cetera. But for the most part, what that funding means is that students will serve as graduate teaching assistants. And this means in our department, for example, they will lead discussion sections. There'll be a large lecture course with between 100 and 200 students, and that's broken up into sections, and the teaching assistant will lead the discussion sessions, will answer all the students' questions, grade exams. So that's something that a high TOEFL score will help. Now, one would assume that the person who has the high TOEFL score will also have a relatively high verbal score in the GRE, all right? With the GRE and the PhD program, what we oftentimes see actually is that international applicants will have very high quantitative scores and relatively lower verbal scores, and that's to be understood for people for whom English is not their native language. We take that into account. But here again, if somebody has a higher TOEFL score, that helps. in terms of if someone has a lower verbal GRE too. So again, it's helpful, but not determinative. Now, well, you know, sure, if somebody has a 100, over 100 in the TOEFL and, you know, is in the 90 percentile with the GRE verbal and, you know, 95 with, you know, boy, great GREs. It's gonna have no problem getting in as long as the GPA checks out. But not everybody is in that situation. And how about students who, again, have lower scores? Again, we look at this holistically. And so, for example, the requirement, the TOEFL requirement for the Masters of International Affairs program is 79 that Soha mentioned. But for the PhD program, we are looking at least 90, and again, prefer to be more towards 100 or over 100. So that's what we're looking for in a PhD applicant. Now, sometimes students have very good packages, you know, great quantitative scores on the GRE. They have, you know, a good GPA, great coursework, good recommendations, but there are some concerns about their English fluency and their abilities in English. But there are ways to address that. And we have an intensive English language program at the University at Albany. And we may, for example, and we've done this with candidates for our Masters of International Affairs program, for example, say, look, you know, we think you've got a lot of what it takes. We're a little concerned about your English. How about coming early? Come for the summer, work on your English in our English as a second language program, intensive English language program. Then we'll see how you do. Take the TOEFL exam as well again. And as long as you are able to bring your English abilities up a bit, you'll be admitted, this type of conditional admission. And sometimes students might take a semester as well. So that is a, I'll get to that in a second. That is a, you know, one way of addressing this. Now, students who have, international students who have studied in the United States and, you know, English language programs, essentially, and so correct me if I'm wrong, but they're basically exempted from the TOEFL requirement, or again, the other IELTS, et cetera, correct?
Yeah, as long as they've been there for the past, at least for 4 semesters within the past 4 years. So it can't be from like 20 years ago or anything like that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
and if may, I also wanted
yeah,
to
and
jump.
here's the American University of Armenia.
Armenia, this is what I wanted to ask.
Yeah. And if that person, okay, the undergraduate degree is English. How do we deal with that one?
Yeah, so that one, we would still require the TOEFL or IELTS. We don't waive based on language of instruction in home country. We get this question a lot. Yeah, so that one we would still require either a TOEFL, IELTS, or Duolingo.
Okay.
But again, that's going to vary, I will say, from institution to institution. So that's a University of Albany policy. You want to ask that question to whichever program you're applying to.
Right. Just also to make it clear, so it doesn't mind if a student study at the American University in Armenia, you take into account the country where is the language of widely spoken is Armenian, not English, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So since we are started with the Q&A, I have another question that I wanted to address again about the test. So what if students get the whole GRE and they have a good verbal results? Do they need to take the TOEFL? So another way around, so coming from another angle.
A very good question. Yes, we would still require the TOEFL or IELTS. We don't use the qualitative section on the GRE as a waiver for the TOEFL or IELTS.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else, Ray?
No, go right ahead. I'm
All
good.
right, good questions. So those are the first part, standardized tests. We got those out of the way. Now we're going to move on to transcripts, another portion that is required for your application to graduate school. You're going to want to include all of your transcripts from any undergraduate institution you attended. So maybe you studied abroad for a little bit and you got some credits at another institution. You should include those transcripts. This question of official versus unofficial transcripts is one that you should also be reading instructions very carefully when applying to different programs. Some programs will require that you upload official transcripts right away. And official means that you have not seen these documents. So I shouldn't say you upload them, you provide them, or your institution provides them. So that means that they're getting sent via mail from your university to that university, or uploaded into some sort of system, but not by you. Other institutions like the University at Albany, we will review the application using unofficial transcripts. So that means that if you have a copy of your transcript, you can upload that into your application system, and we will review your application based on that document. If you are admitted and you decide to come, then we ask for the official documents to show that you've graduated, you have the equivalent of a bachelor's degree, that everything went as it should, and that you can enroll in our graduate program. Just keep in mind that you want to request these transcripts probably pretty good chunk of time before the deadline. U.S. institutions can get very busy and may take some time to send official documents out. So if your institution's the same way, make sure you're giving them a good amount of time to send those documents. You may also need them translated. So just make sure that you are finding either a certified translator. Sometimes Education USA helps with this, and being able to upload those documents so that the admissions committee can comprehend which courses you took and all of that. We don't require WES evaluations, except for in our Masters of Public Health does. Every other program does not require a WES evaluation unless they're really confused by the transcript, but I haven't seen that happen. I've seen that happen maybe like a handful of times since I've started over the past 5 years that I've been at the University at Albany. So usually we try to do it internally so that, again, you don't have another cost to send your transcripts over. If we have questions, we usually reach out to Education USA. We try to do what we can on our end before we ask for any sort of evaluation. Ray, do you want to add anything about transcripts?
Nope, that's good.
Okay, wonderful. Do we have any questions on transcripts? I don't think so. All right, we're going to move on then to letters of recommendation. So usually most programs will ask for 3 letters of recommendation, but of course this can vary. So make sure you're reading the application details. Our data science program only requires 1. Our Masters of Public Administration requires 2. So the number can vary. You want to make a list of who you might use. If you're applying to graduate school, you usually, especially if you're applying to a PhD program, you want to focus on faculty recommendations. So usually not someone that you've worked with, maybe not, usually not a supervisor. You really want faculty recommendations. If you've done any research, the person that you've done research with, maybe you've written a paper with someone, those would be great recommendation letters. Those would be great recommendation letter writers. You want to give them ample time to write the letter, maybe provide them your resume and personal statements to see, so that they can see a little bit about what your interests are in going into graduate school, why you're applying to certain programs, so that maybe they can address some of that in the letter of recommendation. You also want to pick someone who can speak to your work ethic, your maturity, your desire to learn, because going to grad school, obviously you have a desire to learn and to continue to grow academically. I always recommend scheduling maybe an appointment to discuss your schools with them, your programs of interest, your research areas, just so you have some face-to-face interaction with them. They may be able to provide maybe other programs you haven't thought of, or again, maybe going to Education USA. Ina knows of a great program that may be of a good fit for you. So it's good to always sort of talk this out with other people. And then I always recommend sending a thank you note, a thank you email, anything like that, since they took their time to write a letter of recommendation. just following up and letting them know what the outcome was is nice. It's a nice touch, not required, just a nice touch. Ray, I will let you go ahead with
Sure.
letters of recommendation.
Yeah, I'd like to second your recommendation that that students who are applying for PhD programs really need to submit recommendations from faculty, right? From people who know their work well and can speak to that, right? And then professional programs, for example, our Masters of International Affairs program. Now, we still like to see at least one letter from a faculty member, an academic letter, someone who could speak to that person, to the students' abilities to succeed, their prospective success in graduate school, all right? Now, what's also good, though, if someone has extensive work experience, say working in a NGO or in a government office, etc., it's very useful to have someone, a supervisor, to write a letter of recommendation. Sometimes we see letters of recommendations from colleagues. Oh, Joe, I worked with Joe and he was just a wonderful colleague, and et cetera, et cetera. This does not carry so much weight, all right? And then sometimes, I mean, we have actually received letters of recommendation from family members. I mean, you really need to put some effort into recruiting your recommenders. And here's the thing, here's a point I'd like to make too, is that sometimes students, and particularly those students who are coming back to professional programs, they may be out of school for several years before they come back to a program, go back to education after their undergraduate years. So if you are, currently in a bachelor's program, you're not sure if you're going to go on to graduate school, but treat it as if you are going to go on. And I would suggest that you approach faculty members whom you have, taken a class with, and did very well in the class, wrote an excellent paper, say, for example, and ask that faculty member for a letter of recommendation. Now, even if you don't have a set of schools you're going to apply for immediately, and just explain the situation. You're thinking you might go, all right? Why? Well, I'll tell it from the story from the side from someone who has received requests from students I've had many years ago. And while some students, I can remember very well how they participated in class, et cetera, from years ago, I can't remember everyone. And it becomes really difficult for me to write the full letter of recommendation that I would like to, other than to say, oh, so-and-so received a B plus or an A minus or whatever the grade was. And maybe I could dig up the paper or some other writing sample that I could reread and reference. But it's much better to have the recommender write that letter of recommendation when your performance is fresh in their mind and they can write a nice full letter. Otherwise, there might be a very short letter that has less material, I'll put it that way, behind it, okay? And we as faculty members, that's part of our job, is to write letters of recommendation. So you should not be shy about asking us to do that. And, for good students, we want you all to succeed in and go on to graduate school, et cetera. So that's something that, again, I'm more than happy to recommendation for my good students. The other thing, though, is that sometimes I receive requests for letters of recommendations, just, because I'm the director of a Masters of International Affairs program. And frankly, I mean, if I haven't had the student in class, for example, I could say I have little to say about that person. So again, it needs to be a faculty member who you've had in class, who you've done well with, get that kind of letter. And that again goes for both the PhD programs and also the professional programs as well. I think that's, yes, this idea of scheduling an appointment and discuss the letter, that's fine too. And the key thing is to provide the recommender, make sure you have a copy, a good clean copy of the resume. And also, if you do know where you're applying the programs, then you're applying, share that with the person you're asking for. And of course, that personal statement, because sometimes they might be able to give you some tips to improve that.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
Good.
Okay. So we are going to move on to the personal statement, statement of purpose, statement of background and goals. It may be called a variety of things, but this is a 1 to 2 page document, unless otherwise specified. It's usually 1 to 2 pages where you are able to give life to your resume, where you're able to address maybe any educational gaps or anything else that is not obvious on your application that you would like to discuss. Again, it also can be a place where you want to pull out important things from your resume and go into detail about those and tell your story as to why you're applying to specific programs. You want to, especially for PhD programs, discuss the clarity of your research interests and how they relate to the program you're applying to. Talk about the expertise you've built to apply to this program. Talk about your short-term and long-term goals and how this program can help get you there. So not just listing things out, but again, giving life to this and explaining why you're a good fit for the program and how they're a good fit for you. So all of this goes to show that you have to do your homework on the different programs you're applying to. You need to be on the website. You need to be looking at faculty research areas, faculty interests, maybe curriculum, internships they provide, and really incorporating this information into your personal statement. This also means that if you're applying to, let's say, 6 different programs, you're writing 6 different personal statements. You're not writing one cookie cutter one or pulling some sort of template from Google and sending it out. You really do need to tailor this personal statement to each program you're applying to. So with that, let's go into some examples, some do's and don'ts. So again, you want to be specific. You don't want to be very broad. You don't want to use broad language. You have minimum space to express what you want to express in this personal statement. So you really, really need to choose your words carefully. Again, not very sort of sweeping statements like my goal is to help others and like other ones that you see on this slide, but why? What made you want to help others and how is this program going to help you with that? Maybe there's a field component where you get to go out and help others. You use that information to show, again, the admissions committee that you've done your research. You want to proofread your statement. We've seen this before, where right off the bat, they say, I want to attend, and it's the name of a different university and not the university at Albany. And right away, that shows that you're not paying very much attention to your detail, okay? So you really, really want to make sure you're proofreading your statement, which I'm going to talk about in a tiny bit. They do just want to touch upon maybe steps of the writing process. Again, the personal statement is pretty important, so you want to take your time with it. So this is just the 5 steps of the writing process that I recommend. You can pull some of them, you can pull none of them, but I do think that this will help you get on the right track for a strong personal statement. So the first one is brainstorming. Sitting down in front of a computer or a blank sheet of paper and writing down everything that you would like to go into your personal statement. So focusing basically on nothing. So not what should go in there, but really what could go in there. What are all the ideas you think should go into this personal statement? This will allow you to be more flexible, maybe think of ideas that you didn't think of previously, and allow you to explore different avenues for the personal statement. The next step is creating an outline. So identifying a few points or mini narratives. Again, if you're applying to a PhD program, usually the heart of the personal statement is going to be your research interests and really speaking to those and elaborating upon those. You want to be the protagonist of the story, which I'll talk about as well. What does that mean? That means that you want to develop a very comfortable I tone, a professional tone, where you're really able to talk about yourself and go into detail about what you've done without using the same sentence structure all the time, without sort of just saying I this, I that, but varying your statement and again, making it just a strong, confident tone in your personal statement. You'll see an example here of the passive versus active voice. The active voice not only saves you some word count and some space, but again, just gives off that more professional tone when you're writing your personal statement. After you write a draft or 2 or 3, make sure you revise it. So take out these sort of empty words like we talked about, like challenging, rewarding. Unless you're going to go into detail, don't just say, it was such a rewarding experience. Like that doesn't mean anything to a lot of people. Really, what made it rewarding? What did you get out of it? Again, review the essay guidelines. You want to make sure that if they're asking you to address certain prompts or to discuss certain topics, answer certain questions, that you're doing that within the personal statements. And then, of course, you want to proofread. You can solicit the advice of maybe Education USA, maybe some faculty members. Again, if you're asking faculty members for those letters of recommendation, you could bring them a draft of your personal statement. Maybe they can look over it, give you some suggestions as to what else to include, maybe what to take out and how to shift focus if needed. And if you have any questions, make sure you're contacting the graduate program or the admissions office to ask any clarifying questions so that your personal statement is on point with where it needs to be for every program you're applying to. Right?
Yeah. Now, as a member of a committee evaluating applications, we enter into a system and we have a menu of things that we can look at of a particular application. I tend to start with the personal statement. And I'm looking for answers to essentially 2 questions. Why does this person want to, what is their career objective? Why do they want to get a Master's of International Affairs? Why do they want to get a PhD in political science? All right, that's one part. And then the other part is why the program that they're applying to, why the University at Albany, what is it that we have to offer them in achieving their professional objectives, all right? What is the fit between this applicant and our program? And I don't know how to put it, but and this, believe me, has happened, when you read, the university or Rutgers University or some other university, that says a lot about that person, and it colors quite frankly, it makes it really difficult to take the rest of the application as seriously as I might otherwise have done so. And it's probably one I'm not going to spend that much time on, because obviously the applicant didn't spend much time on that personal statement and proofreading it, and who knows how many of them have been sent out. All right. And it's very important not to, and here's another, actually a problem that I see with quite a few international applications, and that is this type of excessive praise of how wonderful our faculty is and how expert they are and how our university is the top university in the world, it seems like, and that's why they're applying to the university here. Now, none of it is backed up oftentimes, again, by any specifics. The statement could be sent to any number of wonderful universities, right? And I think, again, that tends to diminish the impact on me anyway, because I feel like it sounds a bit more like a standardized form letter than it does an individual's personal statement. And I also know my university and where we stand in the world, et cetera. I'm realistic about this. And I want students to be realistic as well about what their understanding is of my university. And I want them to have done a little bit of homework, a little bit of research, especially for PhD students who are supposed to do a lot of research, and they should actually know about my department, that the department that they're applying to, the faculty members that they are likely to work with, their area of concentration, et cetera, and be able to show how they would fit in well into the PhD program. Now, the master's program is our master's program. It's not, again, it's not a matter of having an individual mentor as a chair of a dissertation committee, et cetera. It's more the program. So there are certain things that our master's program is. We have expertise, faculty with expertise in certain concentrations like diplomacy and global governance or global and homeland security. And when students can identify those concentrations and explain how they will utilize the coursework in those concentrations to enable them to achieve their goals, then we see that kind of good fit. So that's the same way that it could be done. So anyway, it's a very important part of the application that I think sometimes applicants don't spend sufficient time on.
And if I may, I wanted to jump here with a question, because as an advisor, I usually receive a bunch of personal statements or statement of purpose from my advisees and students. And so there are two types of personal statements. And my big question, what type of personal statements you as a reader want to receive? So there are students who submit like kind of very detailed work through their resumes, what they did, what they achieved, stuff like this. And there are also type of personal statements that are speaking about one of their experience, which can briefly, show how their personality, their achievements. So you, as persons who read bunch of the personal statements, which one you would prefer to see?
Let me say that the one thing that and I forgot to mention it, so thank you for reminding me in a way. The one kind of personal statement that I really is not very effective is one that is essentially the resume in paragraph form, where it's just, I did this, I did that, I did this, I did that. I mean, I've got the resume here, and if I read that, I'll understand that. What's important is to and it depends on the program, right? There may be different parts of a resume that could be emphasized in a story told about a particular experience, with in a particular position, for example, or an internship that really motivates the person to apply. So say, for example, in a Master's of International Affairs, and a person had an internship at in an international organization or an international non-governmental organization, and they write about that experience, right? It's just a line in the resume, but then they explain how having that internship has led them to want to pursue a career in international affairs. I mean, that's how you utilize that experience. You utilize what's on the CV. I think that sometimes people get, how can I put it, maybe a little too personal with their personal statements and talk about all sorts of things about why they want to pursue, they're interested in international things. And sometimes that may be useful in explaining, say, for example, a problem in terms of if they had a bad semester or a bad year in their grades and they want to explain it because of an illness or something or another, a personal issue. But that should be limited. I would say. I think it's more important to be very prospective and explain, career ambitions in the future and how the program is going to help them get there.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Ray.
Ray.
Thank you.
Since we're running short on time, I am just going to sort of pull up the next 3 slides. We have 3 more slides very quickly. So the next part of the application process or package may be that you have to include a CV or a resume, maybe some sort of writing sample or a portfolio. So resume and CV, it depends on sort of where you are at in life. If you have a CV, you may not. You may have a resume, which is okay. A program may also ask for a writing sample, and if they do, just keep in mind this is likely different than the personal statement. So it's an academic paper or something that you did for a course to supplement the personal statement, to supplement all the other application materials. And then a portfolio, usually if you're applying maybe to an art program or something in the art world, they may ask for a portfolio. Right, anything you want to add quickly before I
would just say that writing samples are much more important in PhD, again, like a political science PhD program. Pick out your best paper that you've written for any of your classes and submit that.
And then the last part is the actual application. So the biggest thing here is just make sure you're reviewing deadlines, you're reading details, you're paying attention to every part of the application. So in regards to the deadline, sometimes the more competitive schools may have earlier deadlines. I think it's safe to say that most funding deadlines are earlier as well. So if you're looking for an assistantship, research assistantship, teaching assistantship, make sure you're hitting that funding deadline if it's different than a non-funding deadline, because usually there are so many applications for a funded position that if you miss that deadline, that's it. There's no going back. So you really just want to make sure you're paying attention to details and dates. And then just the last slide on the University at Albany in general. We've kind of touched upon our university and our school, but I did just want to talk a little bit more about it in case you're interested. We have over 150 graduate programs in 9 schools and colleges, many of which are top ranked by the US News and World Report. In regards to location, I think it's a very strategic location, not just because we are the capital of New York State, but because we are close to major cities without being in a major city. So the cost of living is much cheaper. You get the great experience of being in the state capital. So for like the Rockefeller College where Ray teaches, you have government bodies right around us. For education, we're considered New York's Tech Valley. So we have big companies like Regeneron, General Electric, Global Foundries right around us. So you do have great opportunities for internships, but then also OPT after you graduate, because we all want OPT, right? It's a great way to get that work opportunity, that work experience before maybe returning home. And just a little bit about our student body. We're about 17,700 students. So not the largest university, not the smallest. We're right in the middle. About 4,500 graduate students and about 1,200 international students total, most of which are at the graduate level. So you are amongst a diverse body of students, not only with international students, but domestically as well. So just students from New York State, we have students from all over the country, all sorts of different backgrounds. So it's a great way to come, again, be in a city that a lot of students describe as a good city to study and focus on your studies. Cost of living is lower, but really great, strong programs as well. Okay, so with that, I will stop. This is the link that I put in the chat box. I'll put it in again now that more people have joined in case you would like to receive more information from the University at Albany. But we can now open up to question and answer if there are any others.
I will also put this link to the Facebook, just those
Thank
who
you.
watch us on Facebook also can have access to the link.
Great.
So yeah, guys, you can ask your questions, either tap on the chat box or unmute yourself and speak. We have a few minutes for the Q&A. Before students thinking about their questions, I have one, and I know this is usually top question that students ask about the cost of attendance. So where are you approximately for the students to understand how much it will cost and what kind of, you mentioned that you have scholarships and assistantships available, and how much of them will be covered?
That's very good question. So our I-20 cost, so everything is about $32,000. So that's tuition and fees, that's housing, and that's some additional expenses. So where we fall in regards to, I would say if we were just looking at New York State, we're definitely probably half the cost of New York City schools, and probably right in line with other schools in other parts of upstate New York. Where are we in regards to maybe like the Midwest, maybe a little more expensive, but again, I think you get a good balance being in Albany, access to all the big cities, but the cost of living is much lower. We do have Yeah.
And this is for international students, right?
This is international students. Yep. Yeah. This is the international, this is the I-20 cost is what you would have to show. We do have funding. So graduate assistantships, research assistantships, and teaching assistantships. I will say most of those are reserved for our doctoral students. So if you're applying to a PhD, they get first, they're sort of like the first choice in regards to filling these slots. We do have master's students who do get assistantships. They're usually the graduate assistantships. So these are more administrative jobs. So I have in the graduate school, we have about 6 graduate assistantships, and we fill those with usually master's students. So again, it is possible to get funded at the master's level. And if you don't get fully funded, all of our international students who are admitted at the master's level get at least $5,000 a year in scholarships at the University at Albany. So we do still try to provide something if you can't find an assistantship.
Good, thank you. Now we have a question. Do you offer also business and innovation programs?
So we do have business programs. We have an MBA, so a 2-year MBA. With that, we're also getting a business analytics program. I don't know what you mean by innovation programs.
Yeah, that week you can also unmute yourself and ask follow-up questions, just to make clear what you mean by saying innovation programs. Maybe IT related, I don't know.
I will put in the link to our MBA program too, because we do have a variety of concentrations that you can choose from, like cybersecurity. So maybe entrepreneurship, if that's what you mean by innovation, that's a concentration you can do within our MBA. So I can put that in here. Depending on what you want to do too, sometimes the MPA, the Masters of Public Administration, is a good option. So it really depends on what your career goals are.
Another question about the programs. Do you have joint PhD and master's degree, so that students admitted to master by studying 5 years, they would get both master's and PhD?
Maybe I could address that with respect to political science. And so essentially, if you don't have a master's degree, you can apply directly into the PhD program. So that's what I did. I mean, and you don't necessarily need to get a master's along the way. All right. It's a matter of completing the coursework. It's a bit different than Europe. All right. That's one of the challenges here, is that our system in the United States in political science, for example, and it's not necessarily just 5 years that it's going to take, quite frankly. It may take 2.5 years to take coursework and then take qualifying exams, another 6 months for the dissertation prospectus. And then it depends on how long it takes to complete the dissertation. Some students who have extensive field work in comparative politics need to be abroad for a year, for example. It really depends. And many students end up working while they are completing their dissertations. So they're teaching or they're doing other kinds of work. So it depends on that. So the master's is not necessary as a prerequisite for the PhD. And if somebody really, and I've seen this too, really works hard and they have fellowship funding, for example, from their home country, they can get through the program rather quickly.
Yes, thank you very much. So I just checked, we don't have questions on the Facebook page either. So just a few minutes to make sure that students don't have questions. And what is the deadline for the University at Albany? If you have specific deadlines for specific programs?
They all vary. So I will put in the link to our graduate programs. So if you go there, you can type in sort of which programs you're interested in. And then every web page will have its own set of deadlines. So some have passed. A lot of our PhD program deadlines have passed, but we do have quite a few that are still accepting applications. Some work on a rolling deadline basis. So they review as applications come in. Once the seats fill, that's it. They close admission. So it does very heavily vary.
So for the Masters of International Affairs, we're looking at February 1st for consideration for funding, right? But just for admission, that is June 15th. And sometimes that gets pushed a bit too. So we'll accept more on a rolling basis. And we also review these on a rolling basis.
We just received a question from the Facebook. Can someone apply by the deadline and just then send the test scores? Or
Can
they
someone
should be.
say that again?
Apply before the deadline and send the score report later on after the deadline.
So most programs will need the scores to review the application. So this, in order for the whole application, if like the GRE is required for TOEFL, IELTS, English scores, yes, we would need that to do an admit, to make an admission decision.
Okay. Thank you. And I don't think we have any other questions.
All right.
So thank you very much for this very informative session. So I put all the links to just make me copy paste the links, and I will post all of them to our Facebook page as well.
Thank you.
And would you mind also like putting your email address in case students have questions, they can also reach out to you via email. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Have a great day ahead, you.
Yes, thank you. And have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
And just to say, if anybody's interested in the Masters of International Affairs, send me an email. I just put the address in, and I'd be happy to chat with you over Zoom.
Okay, thank you
Thank
very much.
you.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.